Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Nick. In today's video, I'm going to talk about 5 Crested Gecko myths that I believed and I no longer really do. So let's get right into it. Alright guys, so the first myth, and it's not, it's just kind of like a basic one, and it kind of applies to a lot more than just Crested Geckos. A lot of people will tell you cannot feed mealworms because the keratin or something in them is too high, and it's more likely to bound up your gecko. While I wouldn't recommend feeding them all the time necessarily, definitely if you're mixing up variety and you're offering them a couple times a year or even like once a month, it's not going to hurt your gecko. There's nothing really wrong with it. If you want to make the argument on like what's healthier for them, you know, dubias, crickets, or mealworms or something like that, then that's a different story. But saying that it'll bound up your gecko and kill them, not really the case. Typically, issues with binding like that would occur from like temperatures not being warm enough and it being way too cool all the time, and then that doesn't allow these guys to digest properly or very much at all. So mealworms, they're safe. Just be smart. Don't do it all the time. Mix up your bugs. They're just fine. All of our geckos here have had mealworms multiple times in their lives, and we've never once had a Crested Gecko pass from eating mealworms. It just does not happen if your husbandry is correct otherwise. The other thing I want to talk about is when I first got into Crested Geckos, for some reason I was under the impression that like anything above 75 degrees was really dangerous for them, and like anything below, you know, even like 65 degrees was like was dangerous. Like you need to keep them in this super like 70 to 71 or 69 to 71 range, and that's just really not the case. I mean, we've had our gecko room get up to like, in some of their tubs and stuff during these summer months, up to like 80, 81. And it's not for a prolonged period of time, but it's definitely not killing them. So I mean, in the difference between 75 and 80, while it is only 5 degrees, that can be a big deal in these guys' world. I wouldn't recommend getting up above like 85. I have talked to some people like on Facebook groups and stuff who say that they have kept their geckos up to like 83, 84. I personally don't do that, but we have had days where it has gotten, especially when we moved into our new home, trying to figure out, you know, how warm certain rooms got and how cool they got. We definitely went through some learning experiences of, you know, this room needs to be cooler during these months, obviously, but it needs a fan to help circulate air for these guys, because if the room was at, let's say, 79 or 78, the tubs would be at 81 or 80 degrees. You know, it's 2 or 3 degrees warmer in there. So that was definitely a bit of a learning curve for us there. But like I said before, I used to make sure they were all at 75 all year round, you know, but now I know that they can handle warmer temps than a lot of beginners are led on to believe, and they can also handle cooler temps than a lot of beginners are led on to believe. You know, these guys live in the wild, and in New Caledonia, out in the wild, there are nights where it gets into the 50s. You know, these guys are getting into the 50s. Once again, the beauty of captivity is we are allowed to keep these guys in optimal ranges all year round, which is a really good thing. So it's just something to consider, but you know, don't freak out too much about temperatures. These guys are actually really hardy, and honestly, that was something I used to just get really stressed about, was where my temperature's at. Are my geckos going to be okay? Blah, blah, blah. But 75, fine. 80, fine. They're going to survive. Like I said, prolonged periods of time, I wouldn't do it, but you know, typically as night falls, it cools down. It's easier for your home to cool down in these hot summer months, so they're getting that break from the heat. Ventilation seems to be more important than just heat or no heat. So just something to consider there. Another one that I want to talk about, a myth that I believed for a long time early on, was that crickets, letting your gecko hunt crickets in the tank was wrong, and you should separate them to feed, and you should not, because crickets can hurt your gecko. You can separate to feed if you would like. I find it to be unnecessary, and I enjoy letting my geckos hunt. I think it gives them a lot of physical and mental enrichment. So I let crickets loose in the tank. We've never had a gecko get bit by a cricket. Bottom line on this, healthy geckos will not lose to crickets. It just does not happen. It doesn't make sense. It just, unless that's the most powerful cricket in the world, it will not happen. So just something to think about there. Crested geckos, let them hunt. Throw some crickets in there. Don't throw 10,000 in there, but don't be scared to throw a dozen or 2 dozen in there. The odds of it hurting your gecko, very slim. and honestly your gecko will be able to get away from them. And at the end of the day, if your gecko wanted to, it could just bite them and then kill them and then move on if it didn't want to eat them because it was, you know, scared or something. But we let all of our geckos hunt here, even from tiny little babies to, you know, big adults like Waylon here. We let them hunt. So I don't separate the feed. I don't monitor them hunting. I've just never had an issue with it. I think it's kind of a silly myth. And even like if you guys look on Google, like Crested Gecko cricket bites, the #1 thing that pops up, if you click in there and then go into the tab itself and like read about it, the person thought that the gecko got bit by a cricket, but in reality it was poor husbandry, and it was kept with another gecko, and they got in a fight, and then it led to whatever happened. So even the top pictures resulting in, you know, damage for these guys, it's not even really a cricket biting them. So it's kind of, you know, let your geckos hunt. It's what they're born to do. Another thing that I was told a lot was feed every day, and then I was also told, you know, feed every other day or feed every third day or whatever. The feed every day thing was something I did very early on, and I believed that they needed fresh food every single day. No matter what, you need to give them fresh food. And that's just simply not true. It's not the case. And honestly, from what we do now, I don't think it's best practice, because a lot of these geckos might prefer their food on that second night, and I don't know why. I mean, some of them just like it a little nasty. That's kind of what it boils down to. So if you're crested, you know, if you're worried about them having fresh food all the time and your gecko's not eating, it might not be eating because it's kind of waiting on that food for a little bit. I know, like I've said it before, we feed every 3 days here, and we do that for all age groups from babies up to adults. We just put in a certain amount depending. And since I moved to that, I've had way better feeding responses, and way better than when I first started and I was feeding every single day. And it just kind of, you know, learning over time what is the best way to feed, and kind of like what's the best schedule to put these guys on to get the best results for yourself is especially important. So feed every day, it's a myth. You don't need to feed every day. You can feed every other day or every third day is totally fine. And now the last myth I want to talk about is it's not humidity, but I remember everyone told me you got to miss twice a day, or not everyone. Google told me you got to miss twice a day. Make sure you're misting once in the morning, once at night, and you're doing all this like miss. Make sure it's humid in there and all this other stuff. And then as you really learn, and like if you look up New Caledonia rain cycles, it only rains on average like 13 days a month. That is not twice a day. That is certainly nowhere near twice a day. It's not even close to once a day. I mean, it doesn't make sense. The misting in the hobby, and like this idea that they need to be misted twice a day, to me is just very silly, and it just doesn't make any sense. And I don't know where that gets started. I don't know if that's from like the chain pet stores just telling people this and then just gets spread on from there. I really just don't understand where that begins, because if you just do any research on where they're even from, you quickly learn, like I had to, you quickly learn that that's not the case. And then you start talking to other breeders, and they're like, oh, we only missed every other day or every third day, or we only missed twice a week. You know, I've talked to people like that even. So it's kind of interesting, like how everyone keeps differently. But I will say misting twice a day is entirely too much. These guys do enjoy a good dry out period at some point, so it's important to make sure that you're not over misting, because they don't need too much humidity. Too much humidity can cause problems with shedding. It can lead to some, like, it is still stuck shed, but it's just not like a dry version of stuck shed. And it can also lead to like their toes, the pads on their toes, like rotting out and potentially getting infected. I'm sure respiratory infections are possible. But once again, I think the reason that a lot of these like myths kind of get spread is because crested geckos are really insanely hardy in comparison to some other smaller geckos, you know, around their size that just aren't as hardy. So I think that it's easy to be like, oh, they can't survive that, and then no one just questions it. But really they can, because they're incredibly hardy little dudes. And I would not be like scared to do any of the above. It's just trying to make your husbandry the best that it can be. And sometimes these myths kind of convolute what is actually good husbandry and what people should do. So, you know, that's my top 5 myths that I believed in. You know, and some of these, I know some people push back on the crickets or something like that, or the mealworms. This is just my opinion and my experience. And so, I mean, until I guess something happens to me a bunch of times, you know, if all of a sudden my geckos are dying because I'm not misting them twice a day, or they're dying because they ate 12 mealworms in a year, then I guess I'll change my tune. But until that happens, these are just myths that I believed in. So that's gonna wrap up this video, guys. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We are still doing the Pangea giveaway once we hit 1,500 subscribers, so we're about 210 away, I think, today or something like that, 200-ish. So let's try to get there. Let's send out these wonderful Taste the Rainbow packages to a couple lucky winners, and then let's plan the next giveaway. Let's do something else fun. So until next time, guys, stay safe and stay positive.